Hi everyone, and welcome to my first episode of this brand new podcast called Net2Net. So this is a podcast for football fans interested in learning more about the great teams of the late 20th and 21st century, getting the insights of the panel, which is going to be made up of young, enthusiastic football fans that are going to share, their best memories from the periods. They're going to give their opinions on the topics, and they're going to have nice, reminiscent conversations about plenty of football-related topics, ranging from teams to players to periods of dominance or controversial topics. Everything related to football, we're going to discuss it. So my name is Ronan, and today for this first episode of this new podcast, I'm joined by Kyle Costigan. Kyle is a lifelong Liverpool fan. So, do you want to say hello, Kyle?
Hello.
Yep, that's Kyle. Okay, so let's get right into it. So, today we're going to be discussing three teams that have had a period of dominance in Europe. The period is going to be set over 3 years. We'll define the 3-year period before we talk about each team. So, there's going to be a few criteria for each of these sides before we start discussing them. So, we're going to look at sides that have had a period of domestic dominance, so they'll have had to either have won a league title or finished runners-up. They need to have had some Champions League, I wouldn't call it success, but they'll need to have had a good, strong in the Champions League, so at the very least a semi-final appearance. But we are looking for sides that have won silverware within that period. Okay, we're looking at sides from the 21st century only, so we're not going to go back as far as the Man United 1999 treble winning side or back to the AC Milan, Ajax, Barcelona sides of old. We're going to stick in the 21st century, and we're going to look at sides that... So I put out a survey during last week, and we got back the sides that made the top 5, voted by you guys. So these sides actually didn't make the top 5, believe it or not. You'll be surprised when you hear the success that they endured, how they didn't make the top 5, but we're going to have a look at their success. We're going to talk about everything from the high points of that era, top players, top moments. We'll have a look at maybe kind of the decline towards the end, and maybe how a team would fare in a different era if it would be successful in the modern day. So the first side we're going to talk about is the Barcelona side of 2005 to 2007. So for those of you that know the history of Barcelona, that period included a Champions League win in 2006 against Arsenal in the Parc des Princes Stadium in Saint-Denis. It's the Stade de France in Saint-Denis, sorry. So let's take a look at what happened for the Catalan side on that magic night in Saint-Denis, Paris.
So Ronaldinho away from Pires, rolled in for Eto'o, Lehmann has come, Eto'o's gone down, Julia's rolled it in, but the referee's whistle has gone, I think. It's not a goal, but it is a red card for Jens Lehmann. Henri, Sorcandle! Arsenal have stolen a lead in Paris! A man down, a goal up! Iniesta, through for Larson, on for Eto'o, 1-1! A typically smooth Barcelona goal, and a typically certain Samuel Eto'o finish. Belletti, Larson, Belletti! 2-1 Barca! They've turned it right round in a flash! Barcelona got there in the end. Champions of Europe for a second time.
Pretty talented Barcelona squad, Kyle, would you say?
It was. Compared to maybe some of the later periods of the 2010s, maybe not as talented in terms of a team, but certainly individual-wise, it's Ronaldinho on the team. This was probably one of his kind of prime years moments. Mm-hmm. So when you have Ronaldinho on your team, you know he's going to be a strong player. You know he's going to add lots to it. But I think this was it Frank Rijkaard's second or third year in charge. I'm not quite sure. But I remember there was a big controversy when his first season, whether he was even going to continue on. But then they managed to respond pretty well. And as you said, they won the Champions League in 2016 against Arsenal.
Yep. An impressive Barcelona side, had a lot of big goal fest battles with their El Clasico rivals Real Madrid throughout the years. One game standing in particular was a 3-3 draw towards the end of that period, and that saw onto the scene a young boy who had gone to become one of the best of all time, Mr. Lionel Messi.
Yeah, of course. For me, he is the best of all time. For someone that's done for such an extended period of time. I know some people say, he hasn't done it in multiple countries, or he hasn't really done it on the national stage too much. But for me, the fact that he was only coming into his kind of forte at this point just shows the kind of depth and the talent at Barcelona at this time.
Mm-hmm. So you look at the squad itself, like you said, a lot of kind of very talented individual players, like you mentioned, Ronaldinho, Lionel Messi, another perfect example of that. Another player that probably doesn't get as much credit as he does. I mean, I'm sure he would in Spain, but maybe among people living outside of Spain, maybe not born around that period, Samuel Eto'o, natural goal scorer. I mean, he did it in more than one league as well. He's a goal scorer across especially Spain and Italy, but a really talented player on his day.
Yeah, just a phenomenal player. I think he looking there, 29 goals in the 05-06 season across all competitions. And as you said, he's been able to do it across multiple countries. I think, we're even going to talk about Inter Milan in a few minutes. He was one of the star players there as well. So, phenomenal player. I think, again, just a lot of attacking talent. I think the thing maybe why they don't really push in is maybe due to some of the defensive players that they had, but also the fact that Barca just had so many good periods and good squads over the 21st century, and maybe this was towards the back end of it.
Yeah. Well, you look at that Barcelona squad, as I said, a lot of brilliant world-class players at the time. You look at that 2004-2005 season, so the first year that we're looking at in that period, and you look at the players they signed in that transfer window. You've got the likes of Samuel Eto'o, Deco, Giuliano Belletti, Juli, you've got Edmilson, Messi was promoted to the first team. I mean, that was the building of that squad for that period. I mean, the majority of those players played in that Champions League final the next season, and they were all key players. So, I mean, that season kind of defined that success. I mean, you'd wonder how effective they could have been, because I know, you look at Ronaldinho, and he was one of the star men. No matter who you were playing against, you're looking for Ronaldinho to produce some magic. But without the likes of Eto'o, without the likes of Deco, even Belletti, the scorer of the winner in the final, I mean, would that Barcelona side have been the same?
No, definitely not. This is, again, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure there was a big shift when Rijkaard came in, that they weren't really happy with the direction the squad was going. And as you can see from the names you just named, you had a huge shift in their kind of focus in the transfer market this year. It was almost like, okay, we're going to go out and get the best players, and we're going to make sure that it works. But, if they didn't sign maybe one or two of those players, would they have been successful? I probably don't think so. I think they, some of the star quality maybe got them over the line. It was probably one of the best Arsenal teams. Didn't Arsenal go down to 10 men in this final?
Yep, they did. Yep. Yeah, Zayman sent off early in the first half.
I think on a different day, that Arsenal team probably walks away with their first Champions League. But I wouldn't classify them as one of the strongest teams in the 21st century, but still, talent-wise, were phenomenal.
And you're looking at a period there, of course, you'll know all too well, one of the strong sides of that period would have been AC Milan. Obviously, 2 Champions League final appearances within that period. And they beat AC Milan in the semi-finals 1-0 on aggregate. That goal from Juli in the second leg, I believe it was. I mean, it was a period where there was, as much as I know, Arsenal, I mean, you could look at, and it was probably a strong enough Arsenal side given, their squads in the past. But you even look at the Chelsea squad, they're just coming off the Jose Mourinho era. You've got the Liverpool squad who won the Champions League. I mean, there were some good squads at that time. So the competition was there, and they proved they were on top.
Some people say, the Champions League maybe isn't the best team in Europe nowadays, because a lot of things can happen with the draw and maybe different stuff. But as you said, some of the teams that were around, there was superpowers at this time. Like that AC Milan team, player by player, was maybe something we'll never see again. But as you said, the fact that Barca won a Champions League in that area, you got to give them some credit for. And then I think one kind of key highlight, I suppose, of this era for player accolade was obviously Ronaldinho winning the Ballon d'Or.
Deserved, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think so. As I said, I was young at this time. I don't remember too much of certainly watching him live, but obviously, listening back and watching stuff back and talking to some of the experts and pundits talk about him, I mean, he was a completely special talent that, could light up the pitch on any given day. And I think, rightly so that he won the most prestigious player award in Europe.
The one moment that always stand out to me was the game against Chelsea. Gets the ball at the edge of the box, does a little body feint, just stands there, and he even said himself it was as if he was the only person on the pitch that was moving and everyone else was just frozen, and that's exactly what it looked like.
Yeah, it was almost everyone else was still, and he kind of was just able to do what he wants. And that's just, when you have players like that, you can just only sit back and admire.
And I suppose it's kind of moving out of this period a little bit, but obviously that was the 2006-2007 season was kind of the last year before Ronaldinho kind of lost interest, I suppose, at Barcelona. He, had the nightlife kind of took over. He kind of found interest outside of the game. I mean, I know, like you said, we didn't see too much at the time. It wouldn't have been as big for us, but I mean, given I know he did achieve a lot in a small space of time, but I mean, he could have been at the top for another 3 or 4 years had he kept the focus.
Yeah, potentially so. Again, I think there was a couple of falling outs with kind of the hierarchy at Barcelona, and that's kind of why he kind of maybe moved on and looked at different aspects. But, potentially if he had done something like Messi had done, or some of these top players kind of stayed at the one club and tried to establish himself, we probably would have been talking about him in an even higher regard. But I still think his achievements in the game were phenomenal. And
then one last point I'll actually make, and it's something that you might not be able to say as much for the other two sides, but you put that Barcelona side in any era. I mean, there's a lot of kind of managers, we'll get into Jose Mourinho and all later on, that have kind of out the times a little bit in terms of the way they play, in terms of the way they try and set up, but that Barcelona team could be successful in any era.
Yeah, it's just the foundations that they build on, and obviously stuff like the La Masia and some of the managerial selections that they made over the 21st century at least, is they always have that kind of philosophy coming through the club. And as you said, I think the way they play and the players that they have, probably in every single era, they would definitely compete towards the higher end, top 5 at least clubs in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the Barcelona 2005-2007 side. So next we'll take a look at the next side in order, which is the Inter Milan treble winning side of 2008-2010. So one of those years, obviously under Roberto Mancini, his final year at Inter Milan, and the other two under the ever so controversial Jose Mourinho. So obviously the highlight of Inter's 3-year period was their Champions League final win over Bayern Munich. Now let's see what happened during the pinnacle of Inter Milan's recent success in the Santiago Bernabeu on that magical night.
It's troubled by Sneijder and the dangerous Milito! The score of the winning goal in the Italian Cup final, the score of the goal that won the league title, clinched the league title, and now he's put them in front in the Champions League final. Pass Van Boyten, Diego Milito. It's his night. It's Inter's night. It's Mourinho's night, surely.
What are your memories of that Inter Milan team, Kyle?
It was fantastic. It was a really, really good side managed by, probably Jose in his, I would say, almost his best period as a manager. The fact that they won, the Inter Milan's first ever treble in that season, was phenomenal. I think player by player, you look at, again, the strength and depth that they had in that squad. It was fantastic. And I remember watching the finally when I was younger. They bossed that game against Bayern Munich. They never looked like they were going to lose that, and they always looked in control, and they went on to win the treble that season. It was a phenomenal achievement.
Mm-hmm. And of course 5 straight Scudetti as well. They're only the third side in Italian history to do that at the time. Juventus had done it in the early 1930s and then Torino in the 40s. I mean, this was something that, look, Inter have had periods. You got the period in the 60s under Herrera where they had probably one of the best sides in Europe. But in terms of putting Italian football on the map, of course, you had a period where AC Milan were at their best, and all of a sudden now this Inter side come out of nowhere and done what no one expected them to do. That kind of especially for us growing up. I mean, look, when we growing up, we'd be watching the Premier League. You'd hear about Real Madrid and Barcelona Liga, but you wouldn't hear too much about Italian football. But that certainly put those Italian sides on the map for us.
No, definitely. I think, a lot of people talked about the Italian sides of the 80s and the 90s, how good they were defensively and competing. But I think it's just a testament to show how good that Inter Milan side, that an Italian side hasn't even come close to doing it since. People can talk about, Juventus, that they've won, how many Serie A's in a row, and they've won Coppa Italians, but they haven't come close to a Champions League other than that final that they were in. And even then, it wasn't, they still didn't look that great. Yeah. Where Inter Milan at this period in time were just phenomenal. And as you said, growing up, it put Italian football kind of on the map for a few years until it kind of faded out.
Yeah. So obviously you said the 5 straight Scudetti was kind of the highlight of that. And as you said, it's the first Italian side to win the treble in Italian football history, which is some achievement. I mean, especially for a club like Inter Milan that, they've had periods of success, but they maybe not as prolonged as the likes of Juventus and the likes of AC Milan would have had. I mean, they would have had more periods. You look at the great AC Milan sides. I mean, there's 3 or 4 that roll off the top of your head, and the same with Juventus. Bar that Inter Milan side in the 60s and this one now, I mean, there's not many more that even nowadays. I mean, they're performing quite well considering how they've done in recent seasons. But I mean, they're nothing like that was a side that kind of almost came out of nowhere. And considering the squad, you look at the squad player for player. Compared, like looking at that Barcelona squad, I mean, they weren't the best. I mean, when they lost Zlatan in 2008-2009 season, brought in Diego Milito, Samuel Eto'o. I mean, they had some good players there, but they just performed. They just performed on a top level in nearly every, especially big games. They really stepped up the big games. They got the double over AC Milan that last season, and I mean, of all people, I've never seen a man score more important goals than Diego Milito. I mean, just phenomenal finisher, and I mean, he's kind of one of the main players we talk about here. What's your memories of Diego Milito, especially that Champions League final, 2 goals?
Well, as you said, it's one of the biggest probably game in global football. Maybe someone classified the World Cup as that, but he got 30 overall for the season. But as you said, the big games, maybe player by player, they weren't, maybe as talented as some, but systematically they were phenomenal. I think there's a fantastic video if you look on the Coach's Voices YouTube channel, where Jose actually goes through some of his tactics for that game against Barcelona in the knockout stage of that competition. The detail and, the effort that was put into that game to limit the likes of Messi and David Villa at the time was phenomenal. Yeah. And, the fact that they were able to do it, domestically, winning the domestic double, but then to go on, obviously, and win Europe's elite competition, I think is just fantastic.
There's a good point you made there about Jose and his ability to kind of adapt to the team he's playing against and adapt certain players, and he definitely did that with the likes of, you've got Samuel Eto'o and Goran Pandev, who are traditionally strikers, but Mourinho tells them to play out on the wing, and all of a sudden they just adapt to it. You've got Javier Zanetti, who played fullback for pretty much his entire career. Mourinho sticks him in the centre midfield, and he does the job. But people buy into Mourinho's philosophy, they buy into his ideas, and it clearly worked for that Inter Milan team.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, they played the majority of the season in the 4-2-3-1, and I remember Samuel Eto'o even came out a couple of years back saying the quote was, Jose would be the only man to play left mid 4, and he was playing left side. And as you said, Zanetti was one of the most established right backs in the game, was playing as a part of a double pivot, and you're almost looking at that saying, that doesn't make any sense to me, and yet they won a treble, so you got to give credit where credit's due to the man Jose.
100%. And I mean, one player we haven't mentioned there that definitely deserves a mention for that period, you've got Wesley Sneijder.
Yeah, as I said, talent-wise, when you used to watch him play games, he was one of the best players on the pitch almost every week, and you kind of wonder, where did it really go wrong? Because he never quite made that extra step up to that kind of world-class, consistent player that could do everything. He kind of hovered around. This was probably his best period of time, but, there was obviously the stuff that came out when he went to Turkey and all, and put on the weight and kind of gave up on his kind of footballing career very early. But at this period in time, he was just phenomenal to watch. He created goals, scored goals, worked really hard for them. Obviously, they got the reward of the success with a treble win.
Yeah, exactly. No, they were a good side. And you've got players like you said, Sneijder obviously could have, with high hopes, obviously, coming out of that season, that he would go on to become even better. A lot of players you could say that about, because you've even got the likes of Maicon, who was rated as one of the best right backs in European football at that time. And then he went to Man City, it appeared at Roma. He never really got to those heights. You've got, a couple of players, even like the likes of Goran Pandev, you've got Walter Samuel, as you well know, players like that, even Mario Balotelli. I mean, the hopes for Mario Balotelli in that Inter Milan side when he stepped in, he got 10 goals in the 2008-2009 season, and then 11 the season after that, and he was just a young kid at that stage. I mean, that was before he went to Man City. I mean, he contributed a little bit of City, but I mean, a lot of those players, they just seemed to click under Jose, and when they went abroad or wherever they went, they just didn't seem to find that form that they could at that Inter Milan side.
I think it's just a testament to how good the kind of unit and the system was at Inter Milan. I think back on when you see these teams and these careers kind of fade out, the high point of their careers, and the high point for most of these players would have been that Inter Milan team where, yes, maybe technically or individually they weren't the best, but system-wise and under the guidance of Jose at the time, they were phenomenal. And I think that just shows a testament to Jose and his coaching staff and the kind of club at the time, that they got all these players who probably could have done better, but didn't, but still all playing at such a high level.
Mm-hmm. And you look at, I suppose, I wouldn't say an over-reliance, but there was a heavy enough reliance on Mr. Zlatan Ibrahimovic for the first 2 years of that period. He managed to score 22 goals in the first season and 29 in the second in all competitions. So, I mean, that's a heavy enough reliance. He was the top scorer for 2 years. He sold on to Barcelona as part of a swap deal for Samuel Eto'o. I mean, you could forgive the squad for not living up to the expectations or the heights that they had in previous seasons. You lose a big striker. Look at Man United this season, obviously lost Romelu Lukaku, and the squad's struggling to find that talent, that goal scorer. But I mean, that season, obviously bringing in Diego Milito, I mean, 30 goals in all competitions. Samuel Eto'o managing to contribute with 16. I mean, it just seemed to be the perfect story. Everyone they brought in, you got the likes of Mota, you've got Goran Pandev, Wesley Schneider came in that 2009-2010, Lucio coming in. I mean, all those players, I mean, that season really defined that period. I know, obviously, with the treble win, of course, that was always going to define it, but those signings were key in that, and you got to credit Mourinho for that.
Yeah, and I think, again, about Lan and how important he is, but when he's playing at these kind of teams, they seem to have the one way of playing, and it's the Zlatan way. And I think when he maybe moved on and maybe gave a couple of players an opportunity to go express themselves a little bit more, try themselves a new system, and then when you bring in good quality players, but you're able to bring them into the ethos of the club that Jose did, again, a phenomenal achievement from the Inter Milan board. I'm sure certainly that they'd love to replicate in the modern era now.
Well, definitely. So you look kind of sides around that era that would have been quite strong. So that is the Barcelona era, I suppose, the 2009-2011 Barcelona squad. I mean, to succeed in an era where you have a side like, even we'll look at other teams in a minute, but that in itself is an achievement, because I mean, you and I both know how strong that squad was, but to succeed against a squad like that, not only to succeed against them, but to knock them out of the semi-finals to get into the final. I mean, that game was phenomenal. I remember hearing a quote from the game from one of the commentators that Barcelona have just been Barcelona'd for the third goal. I mean, it was great. It was classic Jose Mourinho, but it was such a brilliant team effort to beat that Barcelona squad, and that's exactly what you need to beat them.
Of course, that's the only way you're going to beat Barcelona nowadays, is everyone putting the team effort. Obviously, I know too well at Liverpool in the Champions League last year. That was just a team effort. But I would urge even people that maybe don't have as much of an interest in football and the tactics to go watch that video on the Coach's Voice channel, because the way he talked about how they single-handedly took every player at that game was just so intriguing. Like, okay, they almost deserve to win it if that's the effort you're going to put in. Now, I know all teams do it, but, as you said, that was the year that Barcelona were the team.
Mm-hmm.
And to be, as you said, to knock them out and put themselves on the perch of European glory, I think it's mentioned a lot.
Mm-hmm. And then, so, I mean, in terms of domestic competition, you've kind of just come out of the period where AC Milan were at their best. So, I mean, it's still not a bad AC Milan side. They managed to do the double over them in 2009, 2010. That included a 4-0 win in the, I suppose, you can class it as an away game. I know it's not technically an away game, but in the game where they were classed the away side, a 4-0 win. I mean, you very rarely see a Milan derby, or even a period of Milan derbies, where one side is, I mean, I know we've had a couple where they both win games, but I mean, to win them 4-0 and 2-0, and that was as much as you could maybe criticise the AC Milan side in certain aspects, going forward, they were no joke.
No, and even defensively, they were fantastic. It's some of the best defenders in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, as you said, 6-0 over 2 league games is a huge statement. And, this was kind of the passing of the crown, if you like, in the domestic sense, and obviously in terms of the city of Milan. But I think for both sides now, they probably wouldn't mind getting back to anywhere near that kind of dominance each. It's been more than a decade now. We haven't seen any of these sides compete on a global scale, or even, to be honest, on the domestic scale. And I think if you look back at some of those games, some of the highlights, some of the players, it was very much the golden years of Italian football.
So this Inter Milan side, I'm going to ask you a question, and it's completely subjective, whatever your opinion is on it. Do you think this Inter Milan side could succeed? I know Jose's been a bit out of touch recently, especially I know the Tottenham side are a lot different to this Inter Milan side, but could this Inter Milan side succeed nowadays? Would they be as successful playing against the likes of the sides they come up against in Europe, the Liverpools, the Real Madrids, the Barcelonas, whoever, Man Cities? Would they be as successful nowadays?
It's hard to tell, because the game's evolutionised and modernised so much that there's a lot more emphasis on pressing and structure of defensive lines, and a lot more on transitions in the game now. That it's hard to kind of look at these maybe older teams from a decade or 15 years ago and say, could they compete? I still firmly believe that the pragmatism of Jose Mourinho would definitely be able to get results in this era. Whether he could, achieve the heights that they did in, 08, 09 and 09, 10, probably not. But I still think they do compete on a decent scale nowadays.
And I know that it's not entirely related to Inter Milan, but will Jose turn around to Tottenham, do you think?
No, I think he's had his last hurrah. I think I just can't see him being supported by the board enough to get what he needs in the summer. I think Spurs are going in one direction, and it's not really the right way that they want to go.
Definitely not. Okay, so the final side we have to look at is Bayern Munich's 2012-2014 era. Quite a few high points actually in this era, but I suppose the one that tops the lot would be the 2013 Champions League final win over their bitter rivals Borussia Dortmund, Wembley. And let's take you back to that night that Bayern conquered Europe over their bitter rivals.
Ribery raising their game if they can. Bayern and Robben could really raise the roof here. Turned in by Mandzukic. Bayern Munich lead in the all-German final. It was a tap-in the end, but Dortmund rather dissolved to let that happen. Turkish origin. And he scores impeccably, 1-1 at Wembley. Nothing Neuer could do about that. Let's get Ribery through the middle. Frenchman's done well. Robben is there! Arjen Robben! Has surely won it for Bayern Munich to continue his great personal record here at Wembley. Well, that's it. Bayern Munich, the German champions, the champions of Europe. At 68, Jupp Heynckes has steered Bayern to a double, and the treble is still on for next Saturday. For a fifth time, this is their time. The brilliant Bayern
Munich. Memories of that Bayern Munich team, Kyle, before we start?
Oh, it was absolutely fantastic. This was kind of where we all kind of started to maybe grow up a little bit and kind of appreciate some of the global dominance. But even as silly as it sounds, but if you remember when we used to play FIFA, that Bayern team, every position, they almost had the best player in the world.
Yeah.
Every position, they had the best goalkeeper, they probably the best pair of fullbacks. They certainly had probably the best partnership out wide with the likes of Ribery and Robben back then. But they were just so stacked depth-wise and strength throughout the squad that the fact that they got the European trophy is no surprise.
Yep, and they were very unlucky not to win it the season before that as well. That was a great night for me, unfortunately not for Bayern. That period, you look at that Bayern team throughout that period, and you look at the Germany squad of the 2014 World Cup, and you can see why Germany were so successful in that World Cup. The majority of those players that played between 2012 and 2014, you've got the likes of Mario Götze, that came in later on, but then you've even got players like you said, like the best goalkeeper Manuel Neuer. You've got Philipp Lahm, Jerome Boateng. Then you got Bastian Schweinsteiger, Thomas Muller. A lot of those players involved in that Bayern Munich win in Champions League side, and you can nearly credit a lot of that to the German success of the World Cup.
Definitely. I think you look at that Bayern side, I know obviously over the period that we're looking at, but even the years kind of maybe outside it didn't change all that much. They kind of seem to have this kind of core. I know they're such a superpower in Germany that, nowadays if there's a player playing well in the league, Bayern tend to sign him. But back then it was, Bayern had one of the best teams in the world and people didn't want to leave them, and maybe the managers didn't get as much credit because the players were just so good and they were able to achieve success. As you said, they won the treble in 2012, 2015, and then obviously a lot of those were part of the German 2014 World Cup winners side.
I mean, coming from, both of us have grown up supporting teams that would have, I'd consider, say, Arsenal or even Liverpool to an extent as a bitter rival, and I suppose obviously yourself, you'd be considering the likes of Man United and maybe Everton, not as much, but probably more Man United. Dortmund, obviously being from the same country as Bayern, maybe not enough to consider them like that, but if you look at in terms of the fact that the year before they won the Champions League, they came second in the Bundesliga, finishing 8 points behind Borussia Dortmund and then beaten by Dortmund in the cup final. There is a traditional rivalry between those two sides in terms of at the top. I know they're not necessarily, one's from one side of the country, one's from the other, but in terms of success, you look at, especially the modern day era, those two sides being rivals at the top, and into that little bit more bittersweet to beat them in the final, I suppose, a bitter rival.
I think this is the kind of Dortmund side that revolutionised German football because it was struggling for competition at the time, and obviously this was Jurgen Klopp's really kind of big forte. But the football that Dortmund used to play back then, they were almost everyone's second favourite team. I know certainly as me growing up was always interested in how they were going to do, and I think we all kind of believed that they were going to win the Champions League that year, that Dortmund side, because remember they had, was it Malaga and was it last year?
Yeah, that's Felipe Santana,
dramatic late win. But that Bayern side took them to the curb that year. A couple of facts from that incredible season. Bayern actually got the most points in Bundesliga history, the gap to second place in history, the most wins, and they only lost one game all season on course to that treble.
Mm-hmm.
So, as much as Dortmund, maybe got the rivalry in and put the competition on, Bayern really put them to the sword that year and kind of established their dominance.
I know a lot of people criticise the likes of the Bundesliga and the French league for not being as competitive as, say, the Premier League, Italian league, or the Spanish league. But you can't argue when the side have that success in Europe, and Bayern in 2 finals in 2 years. And they were, look, I'll admit as a Chelsea fan that they should have won that final. If it wasn't for Didier Drogba, Chelsea would not have won that final. They were on top in that game. Now they did have the home crowd behind them, obviously, but they were the better team in that final. They should have won back-to-back Champions Leagues.
Yeah, and I think maybe a bit of redemption, particularly for Ian Robben, who missed a penalty in that game against Chelsea. And obviously got the late winner against Dortmund in the final in Wembley, but could have easily won back-to-back titles. But I just think that the way in which they won the Champions League this year was almost that bittersweet. Is very much a similar situation to Liverpool. Was, had Karius not been in net, could we have won back-to-backs? Probably so.
Yep.
Almost, it's actually a little bit more sweeter waiting that extra year and doing it the way that they did. This was a Bayern Munich side that beat Barcelona 7-0 over the course of 2 legs in this. It was just a different kind of gravy.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, that was probably position for position one of the best sides in world football. Just give me your description on, because you get a lot of teams that might have one world-class winger and the other one would be a good winger but not up to that level. But Robben and Ribéry were just like, they were perfect. They were brilliant. They probably, at the time, you look at that's a period, of course, Messi and Ronaldo, no one can really get anywhere near them. But for a pairing of 2 wingers on the same side, they were phenomenal.
Yeah, and both of them, I think Ribéry was maybe third or second and won the Ballon d'Ors one year.
Came third, third, yeah.
Neuer was close one year as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was a really interesting aspect because before then we hadn't really seen, as you said, 2 kind of world-class wingers, but playing off opposite sides. And this is what was so frightening for some of these defenders, where they had the ability to just cut in and devastate opponents. All you have to do is go onto YouTube and look at Ian Robben's best goal, and they're basically the same goal on repeat.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, how did defenders not cop onto that? Well, because the problem is that they put so much effort to try to stop him, he got the other guy out the far side who's going to do the exact same thing.
Interesting point that obviously after the Champions League win, that was Jupp Heynckes' last season in his first reign at Bayern. He would come back a few years later, but that brought in Pep Guardiola, fresh off success with Barcelona. His first season, he did win the Bundesliga, 19 points ahead of Borussia Dortmund in the end, and they did beat Chelsea in the UEFA Super Cup, and they won the Club World Cup. And of course, they did manage to make it 2 doubles, I suppose, of DFB Pokals and Bundesligas in a row. But Champions League, I mean, beaten by Real Madrid 5-0 on aggregate, was bringing, I'm not going to say about it, but do you think it was a good idea bringing Pep in?
I think he was definitely one of the hottest prospects in management at the time. I think a lot of people look back, I'm sure he will himself, as how they didn't win a Champions League with the dominance, because I think the one team from the Bayern side that won the treble that year, I was kind of looking back on it, striking wise, they didn't really have they didn't have, they had Mandzukic and they had Gomez, but they didn't have your traditional 20-25 goal man up top. And then, you get Guardiola in, Lewandowski comes in a couple of years after, and still don't get European dominance. I don't think it was anything got to do with the decision to bring Pep in. I just think there was maybe a couple of things that really didn't go as well. Some of the big games, Pep has had a traditional bad record in some of these big games in European ties by kind of overcomplicating his tactics. But it just again shows to prove that how good that side was that won the treble that year.
And you talk about, in the modern day, it's very easy to, if you decide that someone's past their best, we'll bring in someone new, we'll try a different direction. But you look at that Bayern team, the likes of Manuel Neuer, Philipp Lahm, Jerome Boateng, David Alaba, Bastian Schweinsteiger, Martinez, Robben, Muller, Ribery, all players that, 5 seasons plus at the club. I mean, that long-term commitment to the club. I know a club like the size of Bayern, it's a much easier to do that than a smaller club. But I mean, that's something you don't see very often in this modern era, anyway.
No, it doesn't. Again, it's the way the game's modernised. It's very much you get kind of 1 or 2 opportunities. If it doesn't go well, you're going to get thrown to the side. And I think that was very much different with the kind of ethos with Bayern. Was that, as you said, those players they named with 5 years, it just gave them such a great platform to kind of build their success on, when they know that they had, Robben, Lahm, Schweinsteiger in there for such an extended period of time that once they got it right, they were going to get the success.
Is this, in your opinion, the best Bayern squad we've ever seen?
Without a doubt, I think anyway. I think there hasn't been a Bayern side that won a Champions League since. I think that's how you're going to kind of have to look at it. They're expected to win the Bundesliga nowadays. They're expected to win the German Cup. And they've been there in the last couple of years in the Champions League towards the stage, but they haven't quite been able to get over them. So for me, that 12 to 14 side was certainly the best I've seen.
And then just kind of to look at the Bundesliga landscape in the modern day, you look at the competitiveness of the league at this stage. It is a lot more competitive than it used to be. I mean, you look at, especially in that period there, it was either Bayern or Dortmund. It was a question of which one. But you look at nowadays, I mean, you've got the likes of Borussia Mönchengladbach. I know it's kind of a good season for them compared to others, but you've even got the consistency of Julian Nagelsmann's RB Leipzig. You've got the likes of Bayer Leverkusen up there, Eintracht Frankfurt. There are good sides in the Bundesliga, and Bayern still continue to top of the lot of them.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting one because this is probably the closest, at least most competitive team for watch. The number of teams at the top, and it's the one season that maybe won't be finished. It would be interesting to see if it does resume and if Bayern can actually, conquer that. I think it would send a lot of people kind of that have hated on them and maybe said, oh, it's not as competitive in a different direction, because the fact, as you said, that they've been able to consistently be at the top of the German top flight for the last number of years, even with the competition and the money growing there, again, is just a testament to them. So
this Bayern side, so we'll go with the Champions League final side. So you've got Neuer, Lahm, Boateng, Dante, Alaba, Javi Martinez, Bastian Schweinsteiger, Arjen Robben, Frank Ribery, Thomas Muller and Mario Mandzukic. Do you think in the modern day that side could compete in the Champions League and come out on top?
It's an interesting one because I just think that you can see the clear absence, in my opinion, of that goal-scoring player. Obviously, the way the game has changed modernly, you don't necessarily need your number 9 to be banging 20-25 in. but I would just worry about, when the likes of Ribery or Robin were having an off day, who could they get the big moments from? I think maybe there was one or two, but I'd say they'd certainly be up there.
Yeah, I mean, other than the 2011-2012 year, we had Mario Gomez scoring 41 in all competitions. They really didn't produce those. They didn't have a number 9 to produce those numbers for a while. I know Mandzukic he had two, three good seasons at Bayern, but realistically, nothing compared to, as you said, the likes of Robert Lewandowski. I'll put this to you. So, obviously, those last 2 seasons, I know they did win the Champions League with Mandzukic up front, but do you think adding Lewandowski to that Bayern team would have made them more successful in Europe?
I think so. I think it would have the longevity-wise, would have made them, almost unstoppable. I think Lewandowski is probably, in my opinion, the most underrated player in the 21st century. I think that the vast number of goals he scores, the consistency of the goals he scores, both club-wise and then internationally, I just think he's just a phenomenal player. And had he maybe come a couple of years early at Bayern, I think they would have even had more success and probably would have had another 1 or 2 Champions Leagues.
So we'll look at the 3 sides we've talked about. So we've got, obviously, the first one was Barcelona 2005-2007. You have Inter Milan 2008-2010. And then Bayern 2012-2014. So Kyle, your opinion, which of those 3 is the strongest and why?
It's a difficult one. I think the Barca one is maybe overshadowed by some of its other sides towards the kind of later 2010s and early like 2011, 2012 side was, in my opinion, a lot stronger. So for that reason, I don't think that's quite up there. I think the difference between Inter and Bayern is just maybe you got to look at kind of the players. I think the achievements of that Inter Milan side were unheard of, and were certainly from the outside looking in extremely interesting. Whereas the Bayern side, as we said, they're expected to win the Bundesliga, they're expected to win the DFB Pokal. They only won 1 Champions League. Is that good enough? In my opinion, the way they did win it and the way they had been at that time with the quality of players, I think that Bayern side is probably the closest to pushing into that top 5.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, to be honest, if I was looking at this over a 5-year period, I would have looked at Inter Milan. But given the fact that we're looking at 2008, 2010, you look at 2006, 2007, I mean, Inter are still back-to-back Scudetto winners. I mean, they had a good side coming into that era, the 2008, 2010. So the step up wasn't as big. I know they did win the Champions League in 2010. That's obviously a huge step. But in terms of coming from where they started, maybe just before that era, and how they kind of maybe fell towards the end of that era, I know Inter had a bigger fall than, say, the likes of Bayern and Barca. But to be honest, I'd probably look at that Barcelona squad. I mean, like you said yourself, every player in that Barcelona side was almost world class. But in particular, players going forward, I mean, I know they had their problems at the back, and you do look at that in a lot of the big games. There would have been a lot of goals conceded, maybe a lot of goals scored. But I mean, it's very hard to overlook a player like Ronaldinho, players like Samuel Eto'o. You've got Deco. Obviously, that's the introduction of the best player of all time in Lionel Messi. I mean, that Barcelona period, I mean, even looking back at games they played, that game against Real Madrid, I mean, such a back and forth game. I mean, they were probably the most entertaining of the 3 sides to watch. Without a doubt, I mean, that is Barcelona's way, of course. I mean, that Inter Milan side, they were something different, something special. I mean, you have to give testament to Jose for, he's come off a bit of criticism at the end of his Chelsea era. He's come into that Inter Milan side, there wasn't that much expectation on them. I mean, it was looking at, continuing to maybe challenge for the Scudetto, but nothing near a Champions League push. And I mean, that's what he said. He was coming out to win the Champions League, and he backed it up. Whereas you look at that Bayern side, like I do really like Jupp Heynckes as a coach. I think his style of play it's exciting. I mean, he's got pretty much probably the best back 4 I could think of and the goalkeeper in, well, the modern Bundesliga history anyway. I mean, you look at that back 4, maybe nowadays with Hummels rather than Boateng, or with Dante, but that Bayern side were effective in a league. Didn't have as much competition at the time. It wasn't the most competitive Serie A. I mean, you look at the runners-up in the Serie A of those 3 years, and it was Roma. I mean, Roma weren't a bad side at the time, but nothing compared to the likes of Real Madrid during that 2004-2007 period, or 5-7 period. I mean, that was a very good Real Madrid. That was Ruud van Nistelrooy, and you got the likes of Guti, and like a lot of good players in that squad. So that was and the thing about Barcelona, not a lot of people look at, is that that Barcelona team had just come off. I mean, they had a rough period, but they just lost the likes of Marc Overmars, Philip Cocu, Patrick Kluivert, and Luis Enrique. I mean, those were key players in that Barcelona team, so that squad needed a rebuild. And I mean, what a rebuild it was! Like the players I mentioned earlier, like the ones they had 6 players who they brought in 2004, 2005, started the Champions League final next season. So I mean, that shows the strength of the purchases at the start of that summer to make that squad what it was. And like I said, Ronaldinho's just, in a world of his own.
Probably just the X factor, and that's maybe the difference with kind of some of these neutrals looking back on teams. I think certainly us, kind of look back and you think of, you kind of have to maybe dig for some of these teams to look at the success. But you name a Barcelona side from that side, and you say the word Ronaldinho, automatically you're going to get people interested.
Exactly.
Maybe that's just the difference for you. I think they just maybe had a couple of the players that gave them that bit of X factor as to why they may be stronger than the other two teams.
I think so. I mean, look, that Bayern Inter side, no discredit to them whatsoever. I mean, there were some world-class players in both of those sides, and they both had prolonged periods of success. I just think with that Barcelona team, from what they hadn't won a La Liga in 5-6 years, I think at the time, before they won their first one in 04-05. I mean, Barcelona don't win La Liga for 5 or 6 years. Nowadays, you're thinking, just what's going on? What's happening? Like, because they're just so used to being up there. They'll either win the Champions League, they'll win they'll win the league. That's the way it is nowadays. You expect that from Barcelona. Whereas back then, this was surprising. The fact that they managed to put this side together, brought in Frank Rijkaard, and the squad just assembled into, like you said, what was pretty much the X Factor squad.
Yeah, and maybe that's just the difference is coming off that kind of period of maybe. Well, in Barcelona's terms, a disaster, and turning it kind of around to something maybe was the kind of starts of what we've seen over the last kind of 15 years or so, which has just been the domestic dominance of Barcelona football.
Exactly. So what we do have is we have 5 sides. So we sent out a survey during the week to find out who you guys voted as the top 5 sides over a 3-year period in Europe in this century. And so the sides we just mentioned there did not crack the top 5, believe it or not. So there actually is sides out there that have, surprised or have been, in people's opinions, better than the sides we've just mentioned. So that's all from me and Kyle tonight. Join us for our next podcast where we're going to discuss the 5 sides that made the top 5, and we'll give our conclusion as to which one is our best. So thanks for listening, guys.